I am joined today by Ien Cheng of Playful People, and we're going to be talking about Repertoire. So thank you, Yen, for taking a little bit of time to talk with us about this game and about your background as a developer.
Great to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So to start, for people that haven't heard of Repertoire, don't know what it's about, can you give us a little bit of a pitch of the game? What is it, and why should people be interested in it?
Sure, it's a classical music game for your phone. It's trying to give you that feeling. Have you ever seen like a classical music perform, a pianist or violinist? They get wrapped up in playing the music. You can tell they're really enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
The point of the game is to give you that feeling.
Awesome. That's a really cool kind of goal for a game to work towards. Where did that come from? This seems like a really
It
kind
came,
of kind of
yeah,
unique idea.
it came from jealousy.
Ah.
Envy and jealousy, nothing admirable. Because I played piano a little bit as a kid, but never got good. And one time I was in college, it was like a lonely Friday evening. I was walking along the hallway and I heard some musicians warming up in some performance hall. So I go in and the lights happen to just go down. I sit down and there's a small group of performers starting. And the music's beautiful and everyone's getting wrapped up. And halfway through, I see these two guys at the front. I think one guy was like a cellist, another guy was a violinist. And they're wrapped up, their eyes are closed, and then they just look over, and they sort of nod at each other. And I was like, damn, I'm missing out. And then I've got friends who are in bands, and they just, people who know how to play an instrument, it's such a joy to them. And I felt really envious that I couldn't do that because I didn't continue learning how to do the piano because it's such a hard technical skill how to learn to play a piano. So I wanted to make a game. I said, look, what if we can make a game that, of course, didn't give you that full feeling, but created a little bit of that feeling of finger dance. And with the mobile phone, because it's so tactile and your body can get involved with it. And if we could design it right, that even though it's a small screen, you get that feeling of going up and down the scales of music, and you get wrapped up in it, then I'd feel really happy. So that was the goal of the game. That was the inspiration of the game.
Awesome. And you kind of touched on one of the things I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about is why you went for mobile with that tactileness of having it as a mobile game. Did the mechanics of this kind of evolve? Well, I'll have some footage of the game going as we're talking now, but you can see like you're pressing and holding and tapping in different I would say very straightforward controls. I mean, I was kind of surprised for something as complex as classical music is, when I was looking at gameplay, I was like, oh, this really is very quick to understand. It's a really very pared down simple control scheme. How did you get to that point? Like, how did the controls evolve? How did this whole gameplay evolve as you were designing it?
We had competing principles in our sort of design philosophy. One of them was what we call the instrument principle. We wanted you to get the feeling that you really were creating the music. Like unlike a lot of rhythm games where you're sort of playing the harmony, like Rock Band or Guitar Hero, you're following along. At least that's the feeling I always got.
Yeah.
We wanted this to feel like you're really directly playing the instrument. When you touch something, it sounds. If you touch it wrong, the wrong thing will sound. So that is one side of it. The other side of it is we want the playability principle. We wanted to be, the whole point of it, as I mentioned earlier, was for people who didn't have musical training. We didn't want it to make it some difficult thing that you had to learn and study. So those two things were like intention. And then the third principle was what we call the finger dance. That was one of the highest unifying principles, that we wanted it to feel like, even though like touching like this in itself is simple, or tapping is simple, or swiping horizontal is simple, or fluttering is simple, or doing a 1-2 like this is simple. If you do that like in sequence, it's like a dance.
Absolutely.
Okay? And it's just like an actual dance. If you look left foot, right foot, spin, each individual move is simple, but it's the combination that is where the fun and the joy comes from. And so that's what we wanted to do. And we try to design something that fit the right balance among those three priorities. Classical music, many people, I'm not an expert in classical music. They don't know it, but we listen to the music in the background of TV shows or movies.
Sure.
classical music is full of emotions. Whether it's quiet and serene or really, like energetic and excited, and they all come from the same notes. It's not the individual things; it's the combinations
Absolutely.
that create that emotion. And likewise with us, we tried to make it so that it's the combinations of the gestures that give you that feeling of getting caught up. And so we have about 7 or 8 different gestures, and at first you only have to start with one gesture, and then you learn them bit by bit. And as you get better at the game, it's in the combination that the fun comes out.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great insight, and that leads really nicely into kind of the thing when looking at Repertoire that stuck out to me the most as a question I really wanted to ask is, how do you go about translating classical music into this kind of language? I'm kind of coming from the same background as you. I studied piano when I was young. I kind of let it slip. So I kind of have an idea of how complicated it can be to write music.
Yeah.
And you've translated that into something very simple. How do you go about doing that?
Oh, well, thank you. And that's and many people don't see that when they look at it, because you see the kind of end user experience. But it starts with what you're asking about. My personal background is a computer scientist, and I studied algorithms. And one of the goals from a technical point of view for this game was to make the content side of it algorithmic. That's also sort of like a practical issue, because we're an indie team. We only have two of us. We don't have a huge content team and like a team of musicians who can and level designers who can make all this stuff. So as an indie developer, we had to play to what we play to make that weakness hopefully into a strength. And by making it algorithmic, we can take now any classical music and translate it into this finger dance. And that way it works is I wrote the initial version myself of the algorithm before my programmer partner got involved, and it does a clustering algorithm that looks at the different notes, and then and that's the first pass, and then it does, I think, a dozen different passes by now, where it trying to analyze the music and pick out the different gestures. And there's multiple criteria and what it's trying to do when it's picking out those gestures. On one hand, it's trying to pick out things that it's going to be fun. Like if it notices that there's notes that, like, often in classical music you get something like this back and forth, like a trill or something. Well, it's fun to play, right? You're playing these long notes, and something goes. It sounds good in the music, and it's fun to play physically. So our algorithm detects that and converts that. The second part of it, though, is that we want to make sure that it's playable. Back to that playability principle. So we thought very hard and did a lot of iterations of testing to make sure that ergonomics work well. I mean, if you're on a 4-inch screen versus a 5-inch screen, it all matters. If you're doing like this versus you're doing like this, it matters. And so we've tuned the algorithm, to try to make sure that the ergonomics of the song are enjoyable. And on one hand, try to make it so that your hand has to move left and right, up and down, change gestures in a pleasurable way, but not so much that you get overwhelmed. Sure. And of course, some songs are easier, and so beginner players can play those, and some songs are harder, and so people who are looking for more of a challenge can play the harder ones. And so those are all the things that were going through our heads as we worked through this algorithm part. But yeah, it was a pretty big challenge, pretty interesting challenge, and ultimately pretty fun one. And the end result means that when right now in our preview build we have 400 some songs. When we release formally, it's likely, or we hope, we'll have 1,000 songs. But to be honest with you, Jacob, we could have thousands and thousands of more songs.
Yeah, if you've got an algorithm that can just keep processing those, you could do the entire classical music library if you wanted to.
Yeah. So we're excited about that possibility, and we want to get the community. If we can get players excited about it, hopefully the players will tell us themselves what songs they want to see. Hey, why don't you have this piece or that piece, and submit songs to our server, and we can algorithmically process those. Obviously we still want to have a quality control level. Algorithms don't replace human beings completely, and so we still need to check that it's fun to play, that it's musically interesting, and so on.
Cool, awesome. Well, you've touched a little bit on kind of your background as a computer scientist and kind of like this background where you did some music in your younger years. But maybe you could touch a little bit more on how you kind of came to game development specifically, and
Yeah.
how you decided that's kind of the path you wanted to go on.
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned, I studied computer science. That was my academic background. And then for my career, first part of my career, I actually went into the media business. I was a journalist and then an editor and then a manager and executive in the media business. And I worked for big newspapers. I worked for Google. And I enjoyed it a lot. I learned a
Mm.
lot about product development, about interactive media. Whether it's mobile or websites indeed print media. And the part that I found that I was loving the best was the interaction itself,
Sure.
more than the news content. And so at a certain point, for various other things, my wife and I sort of were both second career type people. We
Hmm.
decided to leave what we were doing. We started a local dog daycare business here in New York City. And so that's sort of my other side of my life, which is what's distracting me right now. um, but in terms of this creative side, I knew I wanted to do something with that interactive media.
Sure.
And the beautiful thing about games to me is that it's it's not functional for some other purpose. If you're doing stock market information, then it's functional for people trading on the stock market. If you're doing news, then it's functional for people who want to learn about what's going on in the world. Games are valuable in and of themselves. They're not for anything else. And because I found myself, I love that interactive medium, just as from a craft point of view, I love the interactive medium. And not because it was good for something else, it was just
Right.
because it was interesting, right? And then combined with, I grew up playing video games, and just like everybody loves games, that idea that games are worthwhile in and of themselves, the interactive systems of games are worthwhile in and of themselves.
Yeah.
That's what really I always loved, and when I started doing stuff around that. So when I left the corporate life, I did some sort of art game type projects. I did something called Grasshopper. We made an interactive round table. It's a
Oh,
big
cool.
circular round table, which could sit. You could 4 to 6 people could sit around. It was like we built a bunch of like simple games,
Oh, cool.
like on that. It was exhibited at Indie East at the Museum of Moving Arts here in New York. And so I just was loving it, loving doing these interactive systems for fun, for pleasure, intrinsically, not for some
Yeah.
other purpose. And so that's what led me to do, as I thought about the next project, I decided I wanted to do something, that I could release hopefully to a wider audience. And so mobile games was that idea. And as I mentioned earlier, I always had this jealousy of musicians, so that those two ideas came together.
What were some of the games you mentioned? You played games like many of the people we interview. All the people we interview. What were some of the games that stood out as kind of like inspirations for you to pursue making games?
Do you remember a Commodore 64 game called Archon?
I never played it. That's a little bit
Okay.
before my time, but
Yeah,
I know Archon.
dating me, and it's a completely different kind of game, than anything I'm making now. But it maybe exemplifies what I'm trying to say about the interactive system. It's basically sort of a video game chess variant, where each piece, once they touch each other, instead of immediately saying one side wins or another, it goes to a separate mini game where like you have a real time battle between the two, and it's very asymmetric because if like the different types of pieces will fight each other differently because they have different powers, and it's completely replayable. I played it for like endlessly because the beauty of it comes out of the system of it. And
Sure.
it's not just, some level designer didn't have to go and create 1,000 levels. They just created a really well balanced and a well thought through systems with really interesting combinations of the different pawns, different types of pieces, attacking and fighting each other. And then it was just, emergent from the system of all the variety. So that's always been like inspiring to me, where you can have, endless replayability from emergent systems. And so with the Repertoire, it's actually kind of we talked about the system. We tried to create a system of different gestures,
Mm.
um, and an algorithmic system that converts music now, and that takes that content and then, creates, hopefully relatively endless amount of music and playability. So, anyways, I guess I'm kind of a systems type of thinker.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, that makes
so
sense.
that inspired me. Yeah.
Cool. To kind of bring this talk to a close, I'll ask the question that we ask every developer we talk to, which is, are there any other indie games or indie teams out there that are making something that has caught your attention that you might want to give a shout out to, particularly if they're games or teams people probably haven't heard of?
Yes, I thought about this question. This is the one question I really wanted to make sure I got right, because I've gotten so many help from people, and I wanted to make sure to give a shout out to Josh DeBonis. Do you know him? And his partner Nikos.
Yes.
Actually, I'm forgetting Nikos's last name. They made a game called Killer Queen. It's an arcade game, and they've actually in the process of making like a Switch version of it. I don't think that's a secret, because they were just at E3 about that. So I guess, maybe people have heard about it. But even so, it's worth mentioning them again, because they're such good guys. They do a lot in the New York City indie community. Josh personally is inspiration, as a designer. Both of them are such, I mean, what they're doing is kind of amazing. They're taking a very Twitch-heavy Killer Queen game, and then they're creating something that's going to work over a network with different latency requirements and so on. And it's just, and the team versus team fun is amazing. So I definitely would give a shout out to Killer Queen, the Killer Queen guys.
Awesome, fantastic. It's a great suggestion.
In part because they're just they really contribute to the community here in New York.
Awesome.
So that maybe people don't realize that. It's not just that they make a great game, but they're really great to have in the community here in New York.
That's awesome to hear that the New York community is something that I've really been impressed by. Since I have started covering all the playcrafting stuff, since I kind of met up with Dan Butchko and started getting introduced to your community, it's been really impressive how much the people pitch in and help each other. It's inspiring.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what Dan is doing in playcrafting, and it's a big deal for the community. Yeah. So we're excited to make New York for real, for indies.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, Yen, thank you for talking about Repertoire and how you've gone about designing this game, and a little bit about your background. We'll have links in the comments below to Repertoire's website. So if you want to know more, please feel free to check it out. And please, Yen, keep us in the loop as things progress.
Awesome.